She had always loved music. Even as a child, the sound of a piano felt like magic to her. Whenever she heard someone playing, her heart seemed to beat in rhythm with the melody, and she felt a strange kind of happiness that nothing else could bring. But for most of her life, music had been something private. She practiced alone in her room, hiding her talent from the world. She never thought anyone else would care, and she certainly never imagined she would perform in front of people. Her mornings were quiet. She would wake up, make herself a simple breakfast, and then head to her job. She worked at a small cafe in the city, serving coffee and pastries to the same faces every day. Most of the customers barely noticed her, and that was fine with her. She liked being invisible in a way, blending into the background while secretly dreaming of melodies she could create on the piano. After work, she would rush home, her mind filled with music she wanted to play. The piano in her small apartment was her closest friend. She would sit there for hours, pressing the keys gently, listening as each note floated through the air. Some days she practiced simple tunes she already knew. Other days she tried to create something new, letting her imagination guide her fingers. Music was her escape from the ordinary. It was where she felt truly alive, even if no one else knew about it. One evening, as she was practicing a slow, simple tune she had played 100 times before, there was a knock on her door. She was surprised because she didn't expect anyone. Opening it, she saw a neighbor, a kind elderly woman who often waved at her in the hallway. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," the woman said gently. "I was just wondering, would you play something for me? Just a simple tune, nothing fancy." She hesitated. She wasn't used to performing for anyone. Music had always been something private, something personal. But there was something in the woman's eyes that made her want to say yes. It wasn't just a request. It felt like a chance, a small bridge from her quiet world to the outside. I can try," she said softly. The woman smiled warmly and stepped inside. She took a seat in the small chair by the piano, folding her hands in her lap and looking at her expectantly. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first, it was exactly what the woman had asked for. Simple, gentle, familiar notes that moved in a calm, predictable rhythm. She kept her eyes on the keys, listening to the sound, careful not to make a mistake. But something unexpected started to happen. As her fingers moved, she felt a sudden connection to the music. It was as if the piano was speaking directly to her, guiding her hands in ways she had never imagined. She forgot about the small room, the elderly woman, and even herself. The simple tune began to change. She added soft flourishes, delicate pauses, small variations that made the melody richer. Her fingers seemed to move on their own, dancing across the keys, creating something new and beautiful. The woman watching her noticed it immediately. Her eyes widened and she leaned forward slightly, almost holding her breath. The music, simple at first, had grown into something magical. It carried emotion in every note, and it was impossible not to be drawn into it. She didn't realize how long she had been playing. The tune she had started with had completely transformed. It was no longer just a simple melody. It had become a story. A journey of feelings that words could never capture. And in that moment, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of power. Not the power of fame or recognition, but the power of creating something that could touch another person's heart. Even in a quiet, ordinary apartment. When she finally finished, the room was completely silent for a moment. The woman sitting across from her blinked as if waking from a dream. Then she smiled, her eyes misty. That was beautiful," the woman whispered. "I didn't expect anything like that. You have a gift." Her cheeks turned warm. She wasn't used to praise, especially not for something so personal. She had always thought of her music as private, something that belonged only to her. But hearing it spoken aloud, especially in that quiet, sincere way, made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. The woman stayed for a while longer, asking her questions about the piano, about how she learned to play, and about the melodies she created. She listened to every word, encouraging her and sharing stories of how music had touched her own life. By the time she left, she had planted a seed of possibility in her mind. Perhaps her music didn't have to be hidden. Perhaps it could reach other people too. The next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about that evening. She kept replaying the tune in her mind, remembering how it had flowed from her hands in a way she hadn't expected. It was thrilling and frightening at the same time. The idea of sharing her music more broadly, of performing in front of others, made her heart race. She had always been content to play for herself, but now she wondered what it would feel like to play for someone else, to see their reactions, to know that she could move them with her music. But along with excitement came fear. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people didn't understand her music? She had spent so long in her private world that the thought of stepping outside it felt overwhelming. The piano had always been her refuge, a place where mistakes didn't matter and where only she had to understand the music. Sharing it would make her vulnerable, and she didn't know if she was ready for that. Still, every time she sat at her piano, the memory of that evening pushed her forward. Her fingers found new paths across the keys, exploring melodies she hadn't dared to try before. She experimented with rhythms, chords, and harmonies, slowly gaining confidence in her own abilities. She started to notice things she had never noticed: how a small change in tempo could shift the mood, how a subtle pause could make the audience hold their breath, how every note could carry emotion if played with intention. It wasn't long before a small opportunity presented itself. A local community center was holding a casual music night, inviting anyone who wanted to perform. She debated whether to sign up. Her first instinct was to decline, to remain in her comfort zone. But the memory of the elderly woman's smile, the awe in her eyes, and the thrill of that unexpected performance gave her courage. She signed up, choosing to play something simple, a tune she had practiced hundreds of times. As the night approached, her nerves grew. She kept imagining everyone staring at her, expecting her to be perfect. She thought of all the ways she could mess up, of all the reasons why she might fail, but she also thought of the music itself, how it had always given her joy and comfort, and how it had surprised her that one evening in her apartment. She realized that perhaps the true magic wasn't in performing perfectly, but in letting the music guide her, in trusting her own hands and heart. On the night of the performance, she arrived at the community center, her hands clammy with nerves. The small room was filled with people chatting and settling into their seats. She could feel her heart pounding as she waited for her turn. When her name was called, she walked to the piano, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She sat down, her fingers hovering above the keys. For a moment, everything felt heavy, as if the weight of expectation might crush her. Then she remembered that evening in her apartment, the simple tune that had grown into something magical, and she decided to let go. She pressed the first key. The sound filled the room. It was soft, almost timid at first, but steady. She began to play the tune she had chosen, and as the notes flowed, she felt the same connection she had felt before. Something inside her shifted, and the music began to move beyond the simple melody. Subtle changes, delicate flourishes, and unexpected harmonies started to appear. She was no longer just playing. She was telling a story, and the room seemed to hold its breath as it listened. Even as the people in the audience watched, unaware of the surprise waiting for them, she felt a quiet thrill. This was the beginning, she realized. The beginning of a journey she hadn't imagined possible. A journey where her music could reach beyond her small apartment and touch the hearts of strangers. And in that moment, she understood something she had never fully realized before. Music was not just about notes and rhythm. It was about courage, expression, and the willingness to step into the unknown. And tonight, as she played, she had taken the first step. After that first small performance at the community center, she couldn't stop thinking about the music. The memory of the keys under her fingers, the quiet awe of the audience, and the way the melody had surprised even her. It all kept replaying in her mind. She realized that something had shifted inside her. Music was no longer just a private escape. It was a language she could use to connect with people, a way to share emotions without words. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, and she could hear birds chirping outside. Normally, mornings were slow and quiet, but today she felt a new energy. She went straight to the piano and began to play, not worrying about mistakes, not thinking about perfection. The notes flowed easily, more freely than ever before. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, a way to speak directly from her heart. She started experimenting. Simple tunes were no longer enough. She added new rhythms, tried changing the pace, and explored chords she had only thought about in her imagination. Sometimes she played softly, almost whispering through the keys. Other times, she pressed harder, letting the notes ring out boldly. She noticed how each variation changed the feeling of the piece, how it could make someone feel calm, excited, or even a little sad. Every sound carried emotion, and she wanted to explore all of them. Her neighbors began to notice. Some of them had been listening from their apartments, quietly curious about the music. Occasionally, someone would leave a note under her door, complimenting her playing. At first, she felt shy, embarrassed even, but she also felt encouraged. People were hearing her, and they appreciated it. That small recognition gave her courage to push further, to try things she had never dared to play before. One evening, a friend from the cafe where she worked stopped by her apartment. She hadn't expected company and she felt nervous, but she invited the friend in. The friend had always known that she played the piano, but she had never heard her play seriously. "Can you play something for me?" the friend asked. She hesitated, glancing at the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, unsure if she was ready to share her growing ideas. But then she thought of how the music made her feel, how it had changed her, and she decided to play. She started with a simple melody, just as she had before. But this time she didn't hold back. She let the notes evolve naturally, adding unexpected harmonies and gentle flourishes. The music flowed like a story, rising and falling, pulling her friend along with every chord. She could see the surprise and wonder in her friend's eyes. It was different from applause or polite smiles. It was a real, heartfelt reaction, and it filled her with a strange, thrilling joy. Afterward, they talked for hours. Her friend listened as she explained how she felt when playing, how the music seemed to guide her hands and how she wanted to explore it even further. The friend encouraged her to perform more publicly, suggesting small local events or open mic nights where she could share her growing talent. It was tempting, but fear still lingered in the back of her mind. What if she wasn't ready? What if people didn't understand what she was trying to say? Despite the fear, she knew she wanted to try. She started looking for opportunities to play in front of people again. She found a small cafe hosting an informal music night. It wasn't a big audience, just a handful of local residents who came to enjoy coffee and music. She signed up, choosing a simple tune she had been practicing, but with the intention of letting it grow naturally as she played. The night of the performance, her stomach churned with nerves. She could feel every heartbeat as she approached the small stage. The room was warm, filled with the quiet hum of conversation. Some people were sipping coffee, chatting with friends. Others were simply there to listen. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was just another step, another chance to explore her music. When she began playing, the first notes were soft and careful. She focused on her fingers, listening closely to each sound, making sure every note was clear. But then something familiar happened. The music seemed to take over, guiding her hands in ways she hadn't planned. She started improvising, letting her emotions shape the melody. The simple tune she had chosen began to expand, developing layers of harmony and rhythm she had never dared to try before. The audience started to notice. Some leaned forward, curiosity turning into fascination. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. She felt the connection between herself and the people in the room, a shared energy that seemed to flow with every chord. It was no longer just her playing. It was a conversation without words, a story told entirely through sound. For a moment she forgot where she was. The room disappeared, and all that mattered was the music. She played with more confidence, more freedom. The notes soared and dipped, carrying joy, sorrow, and wonder. She experimented with rhythm, adding pauses that made the melody linger, and small bursts of energy that made the music dance. Each moment felt alive, as if the piano itself was breathing with her. When she finally finished, the room was silent. Then slowly, applause began to fill the space. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine admiration. Some people were smiling, some were wiping away tears, and some simply looked amazed. She felt her heart swell with a mix of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had shared her music and it had touched people in a way she had never imagined. Afterward, people came up to her, asking questions, complimenting her, and sharing how the music had made them feel. One man said that the melody reminded him of his childhood. Another woman said it had lifted her spirits after a difficult day. The warmth and sincerity of their words made her realize that music could be more than a private passion. It could be a gift, something that connected people and brought them joy even for a little while. That night, walking home, she felt a quiet thrill inside her. She knew that this was only the beginning. The simple tune she had started with had become something extraordinary, something she could continue to grow and explore. She began to imagine the possibilities, playing in larger venues, composing her own pieces, maybe even inspiring others to find their own voices through music. At home, she returned to her piano. She couldn't stop experimenting. She tried combining different melodies, exploring chords she had never used, and testing rhythms that felt unusual but exciting. Each attempt brought new surprises. Sometimes she stumbled. Sometimes a note didn't sound right, but she learned to embrace the mistakes as part of the process. Each error was a step forward, a way to discover something she hadn't known before. Her confidence grew with each session. The more she played, the more she trusted herself. She realized that music wasn't just about skill, it was about expression. It was about daring to let her emotions shape the notes, about letting the melody become a part of who she was. She began to understand that the real magic happened not when she played perfectly, but when she allowed herself to take risks and follow the music wherever it led. Soon she started to notice a change in herself outside of music as well. She walked taller, spoke more confidently, and felt a quiet sense of purpose she had never known. Music had given her a new lens through which to see the world. It had taught her patience, courage, and the joy of creating something that could touch another person's heart. Even when she returned to her job at the cafe, she carried the music with her. She hummed quietly as she worked, letting melodies flow through her mind. Sometimes, she would imagine the notes traveling beyond the walls, reaching someone who needed them, brightening their day or giving them a moment of peace. That thought alone made her smile. The small spark of courage, the decision to play for someone else, had opened a door she hadn't known existed. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She realized that the world was bigger than her apartment, bigger than her comfort zone, and that her music could help her step into it. And even though she didn't know exactly what lay ahead, she felt ready. She had tasted the wonder of letting a simple tune grow into something beautiful, and she knew she would never look back. Every day became an opportunity to explore, to experiment, and to discover more of what she could do. She began to dream bigger dreams, imagining audiences she had never seen, pieces she had never played, and emotions she had never expressed. Each note she played was a small step into a world she had once only imagined, and the thrill of that possibility filled her with a quiet, steady joy. And deep down she understood something important. The music was not just about performance or recognition. It was about connection, courage, and discovery. It was about finding her own voice and sharing it with the world, one note at a time. And now, with each simple tune that transformed into something extraordinary, she felt herself growing, learning, and becoming someone she had never known she could be. By now, she had begun to notice that something unusual was happening whenever she sat at the piano. It wasn't just that she was getting better at playing or that her fingers moved more confidently across the keys. It was something deeper, a feeling that the music itself wanted to expand, to grow beyond the boundaries she had always imagined. Every time she began with a simple tune, it seemed to take on a life of its own, pulling her into melodies she had never consciously planned. One quiet afternoon, she decided to test this feeling. She sat down at the piano in her small apartment, her fingers hovering over the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play a tune she had been practicing for days. It was familiar and safe, nothing more than a gentle melody that she could perform perfectly without thinking. But as soon as the first notes left her fingers, the magic began. Her fingers started moving faster, more confidently, almost as if they were responding to something beyond her control. She tried to follow the melody she had in her mind, but it quickly changed, shifting into rhythms and harmonies she had never imagined. Her heart began to race with excitement. She realized that the music was guiding her, encouraging her to explore beyond the simple tune she had started with. The room seemed to disappear. The walls, the furniture, Even the sounds of the city outside faded into silence. All that existed was the piano, the music, and her connection to it. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that words could never capture. Sometimes the melody soared high and bright, full of joy and energy. Other times it sank low and slow, carrying sadness, longing, and reflection. She felt everything the music conveyed, and she could see it reflected in her own movements, in the way her hands danced across the keys. She didn't notice when her neighbor came by, drawn by the sound. The woman had been curious about her playing for weeks, but today she felt compelled to listen. She leaned quietly against the doorway, hesitant to interrupt. But what she heard stopped her in her tracks. The simple tune that had begun so gently had transformed into something extraordinary. It was no longer just music. It was a story unfolding in real time, full of emotion, drama, and subtle beauty. Her fingers flew over the keys, creating layers of sound that seemed impossible for a single person to play. She experimented with volume, letting some notes whisper while others thundered through the room. She added small pauses that made the melody breathe, little surprises that kept the listener on edge. It was as if the piano itself were alive, responding to her thoughts and feelings, helping her create something beyond her conscious control. Her neighbor watched, amazed as the music unfolded. She had heard many people play the piano over the years, but nothing like this. The melody was so rich, so full of life and emotion, that it felt like the room itself was vibrating with its energy. She could see the joy on the pianist's face, the way her body moved naturally with the rhythm. And she realized that what she was witnessing was not just talent, it was wonder. When the music ended, the room was silent for a moment. The neighbor's eyes were wide and tears had formed at the corners. She didn't know what to say. She simply smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. That was incredible, she whispered. I've never heard anything like it. The pianist felt a mix of relief and amazement herself. She had not planned a single one of the flourishes, chords, or transitions she had played. And yet it had all come together perfectly. She realized that her music had a way of expressing herself that went beyond conscious thought, a part of her that had always been hidden until now. Over the next few days, she found herself practicing with renewed energy. Each time she played, the music continued to surprise her. Simple tunes became intricate compositions in minutes, filled with layers of harmony and emotion she had never imagined. She began to feel a deep trust in her instincts, letting the music guide her without questioning where it would lead. Every session was a journey, full of unexpected beauty and self-discovery. Word of her playing slowly began to spread. A friend from the cafe mentioned her talent to a colleague, who invited her to play at a small local event. Another neighbor recommended her to a teacher at the community center, suggesting she might consider performing for larger audiences. Each invitation made her nervous, but she could feel the excitement building inside her. She wanted to share the music, to let others experience the wonder she had discovered. Her first larger performance was at a local arts gathering. She was anxious as she walked onto the small stage, the lights bright and the audience waiting. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart, and placed her hands on the keys. She began with a simple tune, just as she had always done. But the moment her fingers touched the piano, the transformation began. The simple melody blossomed into something breathtaking, moving from quiet, delicate notes to soaring, vibrant passages that filled the entire room. The audience watched in stunned silence, captivated by the music. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others leaned forward, spellbound by the unexpected depth and beauty. She felt the music carrying her along, guiding her hands to create harmonies and rhythms she had never planned. Each note seemed to flow naturally from the one before, forming a story that was as emotional as it was beautiful. There were moments of joy, moments of tension, and moments of quiet reflection that made the audience hold their breath. She could see the reactions of the people in front of her, smiles, tears, astonishment, and it filled her with a sense of awe. As the performance continued, she realized that she was no longer just playing. She was sharing a part of herself, a part that had always been hidden, a part that had only now been unleashed. She felt a deep connection with everyone in the room. A bond formed through the music. It was as if the piano had become a bridge between her and the audience, allowing emotions to pass freely in both directions. When the final note echoed through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the applause erupted, loud and heartfelt. People stood, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. She felt her heart swell with gratitude and joy. She had never imagined that her music could have such an impact, and yet here it was, touching the lives of everyone present. After the performance, people came forward to speak with her. They praised the emotion in her playing, the creativity and the way she had transformed a simple tune into something unforgettable. She listened, humbled and amazed, realizing that this was only the beginning. The music had opened a door and she had stepped through it. She now understood that her gift was not just skill, it was the ability to express herself in a way that resonated deeply with others. That night, walking home under the quiet glow of streetlights, she thought about how far she had come. Just weeks ago, she had been playing in the privacy of her apartment, unsure if anyone would ever hear her. Now she had performed for an audience, shared her music, and witnessed the profound effect it had on people. She felt a quiet sense of purpose, a recognition that music was not just a hobby, it was a calling. At home, she returned to her piano with a renewed sense of determination. She experimented with new ideas, exploring melodies and harmonies she had never attempted before. She discovered that her creativity had no limits, that each performance revealed new possibilities. She began to imagine larger venues, more ambitious compositions, and even the chance to inspire others to find their own voice through music. Each session left her exhilarated, exhausted, and fulfilled. She had discovered a part of herself she hadn't known existed, a part that could take a simple tune and turn it into a work of art that moved people. And as she played, she realized that the piano was not just an instrument. It was a companion, a guide and a partner in creating something magical. For the first time, she felt truly confident in her abilities. She understood that fear and doubt were natural, but they were no longer obstacles. Music had taught her patience, courage, and trust in herself. She had learned that the most extraordinary moments often came when she let go of control and allowed her creativity to flow freely. And so, she continued to play, letting the music guide her, transforming simple tunes into breathtaking performances that captivated everyone who listened. She had discovered a power within herself that she had never imagined, a power to touch hearts, inspire wonder, and create beauty in a world that often seemed ordinary. The piano had become her voice, her expression, and her way of connecting with the world. She knew that this was only the beginning. There were endless melodies to explore, endless stories to tell through music, and with each note, each tune, and each performance, she would continue to grow, learn, and share the gift that had always been inside her. After that extraordinary performance, her life began to change in ways she hadn't expected. Word of her talent spread quietly at first, through neighbors, friends, and small community events. But soon more people began noticing. Invitations to perform at local gatherings, small concerts, and community centers started arriving. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness every time she received one. Part of her wanted to accept them all immediately, to share the music she loved with as many people as possible. Yet another part of her hesitated, afraid that each new stage would bring pressure and scrutiny she wasn't sure she could handle. Her first invitation to perform at a slightly larger event came from a local cultural center. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was more people than she had ever played for in one room. She spent hours preparing, practicing new variations on her favorite melodies, trying to imagine how the audience might respond. Every note had to feel right, every pause had to breathe naturally. And yet, she reminded herself, the real magic happened when she let go of control and let the music flow freely. On the day of the performance, she felt the familiar flutter in her stomach. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the piano, and she could hear the murmur of conversation in the hall. The room felt larger, the audience unfamiliar, and the lights brighter than she was used to. But she took a deep breath, reminded herself of the power she had discovered in her music, and sat down. She started with a simple tune, familiar and comforting. The first notes were gentle, almost shy, but as she continued, she felt the music rise within her. Her fingers moved confidently, guiding the melody through twists and turns she hadn't consciously planned. The audience watched silently, captivated by the unfolding story in the music. Some closed their eyes, allowing the melody to wash over them. Others leaned forward, drawn in by the surprising depth and beauty of each note. As the performance continued, she felt herself fully immersed in the music. Every emotion she had ever felt, joy, sadness, wonder, excitement, flowed into the piano. She experimented with rhythm and harmony, adding small surprises that made the melody come alive. She noticed the subtle reactions of the audience, the way some of them smiled, others shifted in their seats, and some even wiped away tears. Each response fueled her confidence, inspiring her to continue exploring and creating in the moment. When the final note resonated through the hall, the silence was almost deafening. And then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder until the entire room clapped, cheered, and whistled. She felt a rush of emotion she had never experienced before: relief, joy, pride, and a deep sense of connection. She realized that her music had the power to move people in ways words could not, and that thought made her heart swell. Afterward, people approached her, complimenting her talent, asking questions, and sharing how the music had touched them. A woman told her that the melody had reminded her of a childhood memory, while a man explained how the music had lifted his spirits after a stressful week. Each comment filled her with wonder and gratitude. She began to understand that sharing her music was not just about performing. It was about creating experiences, building connections, and inspiring emotions that were uniquely hers to offer. As the weeks passed, more opportunities arrived. Invitations to perform at small concerts, local festivals, and charity events began filling her mailbox. Each invitation brought excitement, but also a creeping sense of pressure. She worried about whether she would be able to meet expectations, whether the music would continue to flow as naturally as it had in the past. She found herself practicing longer hours, exploring new compositions, and experimenting with techniques she hadn't tried before. Her growth as a performer was not without challenges. There were nights when she felt exhausted, frustrated by a piece that wouldn't sound right or by her own doubts. She questioned whether she was ready for this attention, whether she could live up to the rising expectations. But each time she played, she reminded herself of the moments when the music had surprised her, when her fingers had danced across the keys in ways she had never imagined. Those memories gave her courage, reminding her that the power of music came from letting go and trusting her instincts. One day, she received an invitation that both thrilled and terrified her. A local radio station wanted her to perform live for a small broadcast audience. It was the first time her music would reach beyond a physical room, allowing people she had never met to hear her melodies. She spent days preparing, balancing the need for structure with the desire to let the music flow naturally. She knew that this would be a defining moment, a test of her ability to share her music with a wider audience while staying true to herself. When the day arrived, she arrived at the studio early, feeling nervous but focused. The sound engineers welcomed her warmly, and she took her place at the piano. As soon as the first notes left her fingers, the nerves melted away. The music took over, guiding her through melodies that soared and dipped, creating a journey for the listeners she couldn't see. She felt the same thrill she had experienced before, a sense that the piano was an extension of her heart and soul, allowing her to communicate with people she had never met. The broadcast was a success. Messages from listeners poured in, sharing how moved they had been by her performance. Some said the music had made them feel joy. Others said it had brought comfort during difficult times. She realized that her gift could reach far beyond her small world, touching hearts across the city. The realization was humbling yet exhilarating. She felt a responsibility to continue sharing her music, to explore new melodies and stories that could inspire and comfort others. With growing recognition came new challenges. She found herself balancing performances, practice sessions, and her daily life, often feeling torn between her passion and the demands of the outside world. Some days the pressure weighed heavily on her, making her question whether she could keep up. But every time she returned to the piano, she rediscovered the joy and freedom that had first drawn her to music. The act of playing, of letting the music guide her, reminded her why she had started this journey and why it mattered so deeply. She also began to notice the subtle ways music affected the people around her. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers would approach her after performances, sharing how a single melody had brightened their day or lifted a burden from their heart. She realized that music was not just entertainment, it was a bridge, a language that could communicate feelings words often could not. This understanding deepened her connection to her craft and strengthened her desire to continue performing. One afternoon, after a particularly moving performance at a community festival, she sat alone at her piano in the quiet of the venue, She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the shy musician playing simple tunes in her apartment, to the performer whose melodies now touched countless lives. She felt a mixture of gratitude, pride, and humility. She knew that the journey was far from over, that there were still countless melodies to discover, and endless stories to tell through her music. She also understood that recognition, while gratifying, was not the ultimate goal. The true joy came from the act of creating, from the way music could surprise her, challenge her, and allow her to express emotions she could not put into words. Each performance was an opportunity to grow, to explore, and to connect. And even though the stages were bigger and the audiences larger, the essence of her music remained the same. It was a reflection of her heart and the beauty she saw in the world. As she walked home that evening, the city lights twinkling around her, she felt a quiet sense of purpose. She had discovered something extraordinary within herself, a talent that had the power to touch lives and inspire wonder. She knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, that there would be challenges and doubts along the way. But she also knew that the music would guide her, that each note held the potential to transform not only the listeners but herself as well. At home, she returned to her piano, her fingers moving naturally over the keys. She experimented with new melodies, exploring harmonies and rhythms she had never tried before. She allowed herself to make mistakes, knowing that each one was part of the learning process, and she discovered joy in the unexpected turns the music took. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a mirror reflecting her own growth. She realized that recognition and opportunity were meaningful, but they were not the heart of her journey. The true magic lay in the connection between herself and the music, the way each note could carry emotion, tell a story, and reach the hearts of those who listened. That understanding gave her confidence, courage, and a sense of direction she had never felt before. And so, she continued to play, performing whenever she could, exploring melodies both familiar and new, and allowing the music to guide her in ways she could not always predict. Each audience, each performance, and each note became a step forward in her journey, a journey of discovery, expression, and human connection. She knew that the best was yet to come, and that the simple tunes she once played were only the beginning of the extraordinary path that lay ahead. By now she had traveled far beyond the small, quiet world she had once known. Her piano playing had grown into something extraordinary, a talent that not only surprised her but touched the hearts of everyone who listened. Yet even with recognition, invitations, and applause, she never lost sight of why she played in the first place. It had always been about more than notes or skill. It had always been about emotion, connection, and discovery. Her days were now full, a mix of practice, performances, and teaching herself new pieces. Sometimes she felt tired, overwhelmed by the constant demands, but she always returned to the piano, where she felt at home. Each time she sat down, she was reminded that the music was a living thing. It could surprise her, guide her, and help her grow in ways she hadn't imagined. And each time she played for an audience, she saw how the music could reach beyond herself to touch someone else's life. One day, she received an invitation to perform at a charity event organized for children. The hall was small, filled with kids and their parents, and she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. Performing for an audience so different from the ones she had faced before brought new challenges. Children were unpredictable. They might laugh, shout, or move around. She had to adapt, to let the music speak clearly even in a lively, noisy environment. When she began to play, the simple tune she had chosen quickly transformed. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating rhythms that caught the children's attention immediately. She added playful variations, light and bright passages that made the melody feel alive. Some children clapped along, others swayed to the rhythm, and a few closed their eyes, captivated by the sound. The parents watched silently, amazed at how her music had captured the room. She noticed that as she played, the children responded naturally to the music. Their laughter, their clapping, their expressions of wonder, everything became part of the performance. It was no longer just about her or the piano. It was about sharing joy and creating a moment that everyone in the room could experience together. She realized that this was one of the purest forms of connection she had ever felt. Music had become a bridge between herself and others, a language everyone could understand. After the performance, parents and children alike came forward to express their admiration. Some children hugged her, telling her how much they had loved the music. Others asked questions about the piano, curious about how she could make the keys sound so magical. She smiled, answered their questions, and felt a warmth in her heart she could not have imagined when she first began playing simple tunes in her apartment. That evening, walking home through the quiet streets, she reflected on her journey, from private practice sessions to community performances, from nervous beginnings to moments of public admiration. She had grown in ways she hadn't thought possible. She understood now that her gift was not just technical skill. It was the ability to connect, to evoke emotion, and to inspire others. She felt grateful for the journey, for the challenges, and for every moment of doubt that had pushed her to explore deeper. Her growth was not only in her performances but also in herself. She had learned patience, resilience, and the courage to trust her instincts. She had discovered that fear and doubt were not obstacles to avoid, but signs that she was stepping beyond her comfort zone. And she had learned that true fulfillment came not from applause or recognition, but from the knowledge that her music could touch someone's heart. In the months that followed, her life continued to expand in unexpected ways. Invitations came from larger venues, local radio shows, and cultural festivals. Each opportunity brought a new challenge and a new chance to grow. She experimented with compositions, explored genres she had never tried, and discovered that the boundaries of her music were only limited by her imagination. Every performance became a journey, both for herself and for the audience, as she allowed the music to guide her. Yet despite the increasing demands, she remained grounded. She still practiced in her small apartment, sometimes late into the night, just as she had when no one was listening. She remembered the thrill of that first simple tune that had grown into something extraordinary. And she knew that her connection to the piano was what mattered most. It was not about fame or recognition. It was about honesty, expression, and the pure joy of creating. Her music also began to inspire others. Young musicians in the community started seeking her guidance, asking her for advice on how to play, how to practice, and how to find their own voice. She shared her experiences openly, encouraging them to experiment, to make mistakes, and to trust their instincts. Watching them grow reminded her of her own journey, of the excitement and fear she had felt when she first dared to perform for others. It gave her a sense of purpose beyond her own performances, a way to pay forward the magic she had discovered. One evening, after a long day of performing and teaching, she sat at the piano alone. The room was quiet and the lights were soft. She began to play a new piece she had been composing for weeks. At first it was simple, gentle, and familiar. But as the notes flowed, the music took on a life of its own. Her fingers moved instinctively, creating harmonies, rhythms, and melodies she hadn't consciously imagined. She felt the same exhilaration she had felt years ago, the same joy and surprise as the music guided her hands in new directions. It struck her that the journey she had been on was never really about the audience, the recognition, or even the performances. It was about discovery, of music, of herself, and of the connection that art could create. Each note, each melody, each performance was a step on that journey, a reminder of the wonder that comes from following one's passion, no matter how uncertain or small it may begin. As she finished the piece, she sat back and listened to the final echoes in the room. A sense of calm and fulfillment washed over her. She had come a long way from the quiet evenings spent practicing alone, from the nervous first performance at the community center, and from the simple tunes she had once thought were all she could manage. She had discovered a world she had never imagined, a world where her music could inspire, connect, and transform. She realized that her story was not just about talent, it was about courage, perseverance, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. It was about taking small steps, one melody at a time, and trusting that those steps would lead to something greater. And in that realization, she found peace, joy, and a deep sense of purpose. From that day forward, she continued to play, to explore, and to share her music. She performed at festivals, small gatherings, schools, and community events. She taught, inspired, and encouraged others to find their own voices. And she never forgot the quiet moments in her apartment, the first simple tune that had sparked a journey of discovery and wonder. Her music became more than a talent. It became a part of who she was, a reflection of her heart and soul. She understood that the piano had not only given her a voice, but had taught her how to listen, how to feel, and how to connect with others. Through every note, she shared a piece of herself, inviting the world to experience the beauty, emotion, and magic that had always lived inside her. And so, her journey continued not with fanfare or expectation, but with quiet joy and purpose. She played because she had to, because the music was a part of her, and because she knew that each melody, no matter how simple at first, had the potential to grow into something extraordinary. She had learned that the true wonder of music and of life was in the unfolding, in the surprises and in the courage to let her heart guide her. Her story, like her music, had become a journey of transformation. From the shy, hesitant musician playing simple tunes alone in her apartment, she had grown into a performer who could move hearts, inspire others, and share a gift that was uniquely her own. And in every note, every melody, every performance, she carried the quiet, unshakable understanding that the simplest beginnings could lead to the most extraordinary discoveries.